Hello and welcome back to my living room. I'm not going to get into why, I'm going to keep gesturing over here because that's usually where my wall of books is, and also because that's where my office is. I'm just not in there right now. Anyway, so today I wanted to talk about, seeing as it is my first video in Pride Month and seeing as I missed out on my opportunity to post a video during MCM Comic Con because it was overwhelming. I got a little bit too much stuff to do and not enough time to do all the things I needed to get done. There's a lot of stuff going on in my personal life as well, but that's not the point. The point is that today I want to talk about how to write unlabeled LGBT characters and why you should anyway. So it's been a while since I added to the How to Write LGBT Characters and Why You Should Anyway series, and this is it. This is an addition to that series. The reason it's been a while is because I didn't really know what I wanted to say. I was trying to come up with stuff. That makes it sound like I'm sort of sitting there going, no. I was trying to come up with stuff in a really genuine way, and I only want to talk about something that I feel like I have a level of expertise in and that I have a full and thorough understanding of and that I'm comfortable talking about. So for example, why is there no How to Write Lesbian Characters and Why You Should Anyway? And the answer to that is because I don't really know how to talk about that. I hope someone else can fill that gap for you because it's not going to be me. So, how to write unlabeled characters and why you should anyway, especially considering that in almost every piece before this, I've said, don't leave your characters without labels. And then in almost every book that I have written, I haven't given my characters labels. What's going on? Well, basically, I know it sounds like it could very easily be interpreted as author tubers doing that thing they always do where they give you one piece of advice and then they don't fucking follow it, right? And I see how it looks like that. I don't think it is that because by and large, I stand by my statements that it is always better to use the current term where possible, right? It's the where possible that I have a greater understanding of, and bearing in mind that a lot of the pieces of How to Write LGBT Characters and Why You Should Anyway came out before I had published even one book, right? It's not like I was talking out of my ass or anything, but I was talking from an experienced, no, that's not the right word. I was talking from a place of inexperience, and I don't think that the advice is bad, but I think now, having written 6 books and working on publishing number 7, I am coming at this from a very different level of experience and a very different type of experience. I have done more book writing. I have experienced more characters. I have not used labels a lot. And on top of that, or rather as part and parcel of that, part of why that happens is that these characters are in sci-fi and fantasy worlds, right? Or maybe your characters are in historical worlds. And to be fair, in my pseudo-historical world, in my Pirates universe, again, I would gesture, but it's not here. Not that kind of dandy. In my Pirates universe, that is sort of ostensibly historical, but I took too many liberties, so I made a map. That I do use era appropriate terminology. At one point in the second book, we have someone who's a confirmed bachelor. We have references to preference for violets, all of that stuff that is coded language from that era that I was utilizing to inspire me for this. That's all in there. I have that in its existence. And it's not like I don't make reference to also in those books, lieges and mixes is a term that pops up a lot, which is the non-binary members of the ton, right? I don't think I use the word non-binary, but I do use the term lieges and mixes, which is titling for non-binaries. So, why do I not just do that in everything, right? Why would an author and me not just use that in everything? And the answer is that for some people, it is too far outside of the scope of their fantasy or sci-fi book. For example, again, I'm going to be using a lot of examples from my books, right? For example, in the Guardian Cadet series, nobody's using the word bisexual, right? At one point, Calic, the love interest, in book 1, says that his brother is straight and he is decidedly not. I'm putting a lot of bunny ears because these are like full-on quotes. But that was him coming out, right? For me, I thought that was clear enough. He's flirting with a woman in the moment, and then he says he's decidedly not straight, right? To my mind, there's only one option, and it's M-spec bisexual umbrella, right? But not everybody understood that, and that's one of those risks you take if you don't use the official terminology, right? If you don't use current modern terms, there is a high risk that people are just not going to understand you. They're not going to see what you're hinting at. They're not going to see what you're trying to say. They're just going to look at it and be there like, what does that mean? I don't care, right? And that's completely reasonable. Like, people can do what they want. People can think what they want. People don't have to write an essay on every single one of your characters or spend a lot of time thinking about how they work or what their existence looks like, right? People can just read the book and move on. People can do what they want. And I know that a lot of people didn't understand that. A lot of people to this day probably don't understand that Calic is meant to be bi until we get into the second book and he starts talking about his ex, who is a man. But that is actually also spears us straight into how can you make it clear that a character is, for example, bi without using the term bi, right? And in this case, that works very well. The having them have an ex that is a different gender to their current love interest is a great way to do that. Because, well, that's sort of how bisexuality works. But, and, more of an and than a but, that's not always appropriate. And I'm not trying to imply that that's always the right or most appropriate choice, right? Like, I'm not saying the only way to do this is with bi characters. Because obviously if someone has a love interest who is the same or a similar gender to them, it's very easy to read them as gay, right? It's very easy to read them as like a man loving man or a woman loving woman or an NB loving NB, right? And again, NBs are relatively easy to spot if they're using neopronouns. So what about the more hidden or more difficult to spot at a glance identities? What do you do with that? If you don't want to use a term, if you don't want to use a modern term, a currently appropriately acceptable term, if you don't want to do that, what do you use instead? Or how do you make it clear instead? And don't get me wrong, you can come up with stuff that is appropriate for the world you have built, whatever that happens to look like, right? Like, maybe you're living in a bisexual default world, and like most of my books, and you're thinking, well, I don't want to make a point of them coming out as bi because A, I don't want to write that, and B, it's a bisexual default world, but how do I make it clear that this is a bisexual default world? And the answer is that's really hard to do, actually. But you just have to put the work into making it clear that a lot of the people around them are in queer relationships and nobody bats an eye, right? And then on top of that, you can give them exes. What if giving them an ex doesn't fit the story? What if, like with Mary, they've never dated before? What then? Okay, cool. Then just have them, like, be interested in several different genders of people, right? If you want them to be obviously trans and you don't want to use the word trans, completely fair, I understand it. It doesn't always fit into every universe that we build, right? You can do things like having them talk about when they were a child. You can have them talk about when they were a child and how they used to be part of like a single gender organization potentially, and have people be there like, oh, I didn't think they let in your gender, and the person can be there like, oh yeah, we all made some mistakes, and that can be enough. Like, we all made some mistakes, sounds like we all made some mistakes, I was always me and this gender, but we didn't know that at the time, you know? And like, even then, a lot of people who are trans have a really chill like attitude about previous genders and will say things like, oh yeah, when I was a little boy. And you're sort of there like, oh cool. Wow. You know, like it's a surprise often when there's like beautiful, gorgeous women standing in front of you going, yeah, when I was a little boy, and you're sort of like, ooh, cool. But like it is also just a thing that some people say, and I'm not saying that every trans person in the world is super comfy with their gender assigned at birth, and I'm not saying that every trans person in the world is going to be chill about that, and I'm not saying you have to write a trans person who's like that and has that kind of attitude towards it. I'm saying sometimes that happens, and if you'd like to, you can. And then other times you can do all of the other stuff in those early videos, or some of the other stuff in those early videos that I recommend. You can use coding, you can use like descriptive terms that help you display to people that these characters are, insert identity label here, even if you don't want to use those terms on the page exactly as they are. And I think what it comes down to is not using a term or the modern term, right? And again, I'm saying it as a term or the modern term because if you want to use a historical term, or if you want to use a fantastical or a sci-fi type of term, that's completely reasonable. And I don't think that, I don't know, it's one of those ones where it kind of both counts and doesn't count as not using a label, because you are using a label and potentially that label could be very clear, but also because it's not modern terminology, it might be missed, right? So that's sort of a middle ground there. But if you don't want to use any term because you don't think it fits the character, the story, whatever, and I completely understand how that works now in a way that I didn't like 5 years ago. But if you want to do that, then you can absolutely just use terms to describe, right? Make sure you're putting in that description for clarity's sake, if nothing else, because otherwise it's very, very, either way, it's very, very easy for people to miss. I mean, honestly, even if they come out on the page half the time, it's very easy for people to miss. But like, putting in that clarity as well as you can is very important for being able to say that you did your due diligence in making the character clearly queer, right? But, and though, it's never gonna be perfect for everyone, you know? Like, there are gonna be people that miss it, there are gonna be people that misunderstand it, and that's really normal, and that's really okay. Like, sometimes having vagueness involved is very helpful, because sometimes that vagueness allows people to center their own identities in a character, whether you intended that to be the case or not. And sometimes that's really validating. Like, there's this whole thing that is discussed. I cannot for the life of me remember who said it. I wish I could. But there's this whole thing that's discussed about how a lot of queer youth and queer people in general have to like translate like cis and straight narratives into queer narratives. They have to put everything, and this is true of a lot of minority experience as well, where you have to put yourself, you have to put a piece of media through a like internal translation to be able to, not to be able to identify with it, but to be able to identify with it. Like, there is a barrier between you and identifying with the characters, and you have to do that mental maths by yourself, right? And I think sometimes as queer writers or as writers of queer characters, the vagueness allows people to fill in that translation for themselves. But it's like, instead of having to build a door in a wall, it's like you've left a door, but you haven't, like, it's not a doorway that they can see through and like, and just walk through if they share the identity, or it's like it's like a visible barrier. Oh my God, I feel like I'm making a mouthful of this. It's like, normally there's just a wall between you and the character, if the character has some matching identity traits with you, it's like there is a doorway and it's open. There's no door in the doorway. If you are vague, for some people, there is a doorway with a door that they can open because they are filling that doorway with their own lived experience, their own experience of themselves, and they are able to fit that door of their own identity into the door frame you've built, right? In a way that having a solid, clear demonstration and description of what exactly that character's identity is wouldn't necessarily allow if it didn't align perfectly or very neatly at the very least with their own personal identity. I actually have a better example of this in disability. So a lot of disability symptoms can be quite similar, right? That is like a lot of disabilities, a lot of chronic illnesses include things like pain, fatigue, because being in pain is tiring, brain fog type symptoms, whether that again is just part of the fatigue or whether it's specifically brain fog. Like those two things are very conflatable, they're very similar experiences. So like, for example, my whole situation with my disability is surprisingly similar to my mother-in-law's disability situation, despite the fact that we do not have the same disabilities, right? And like, they're both testable ones. So it's not like we're coming at this from the position of like, and again, this is not to dismiss anyone who has a difficult to diagnose non-testable disability at all, right? Not at all. But like, the point I'm trying to make is because we both have very clear, distinct, and I'm going to say medium easy diagnosable conditions, it's very, very clear that they're not the same, right? Like I'm just going to say it, my mother-in-law has MS. She's not shy about that fact. I don't know why I'm being so cagey about it. She's got MS, right? Multiple sclerosis. I do not have multiple sclerosis. I don't. I'm not saying what I have because I don't want to talk about it. But our symptoms are very similar. It's a very comparable situation that we both find ourselves in, including the diagnosis journey, interestingly enough. And that's true of a lot of disabilities, right? So if you put in a book, for example, that a character has multiple sclerosis, then obviously anyone who has multiple sclerosis is MS is going to be like, oh, cool, it's me, right? But if you, instead of doing that, just describe the symptoms, the tiredness, the difficulty using your limbs, the pain, the brain fog, whatever else you want to put in, these are just some of the examples of symptoms, they're not all of them. Then people with MS are going to be there like, oh, cool, this might be MS because that's what I have and those are my symptoms. But then somebody with like MECFS, I can't pronounce that one to be fair, chronic fatigue syndrome, and the scientific name for chronic fatigue syndrome, might be looking at it going, oh yeah, I know exactly what that feels like. They might have what I have. Unlike maybe someone like me who has a different thing, maybe they're like, oh yeah, those are my symptoms also. They might have what I have. And like a lot of people with a lot of different disabilities can come together and be there like, this experience is the same as my experience. Like maybe the door frame looks a bit funky, but it could be my door frame, you know? And it's similar, not the same, with some queer identities. Like the things that unite us as a community are often the things that are that are often the things that we lean on to describe the experience as authors, right? The things that we experience as a wider community are often, not always, shared. Like, again, if I'm going to use the MS and what I have situation, with MS, one of the things you have is lesions on your brain. That's one of the ways they diagnose it. It's an interesting fact about MS. And that's very specifically, and I think completely nothing elsey but MS, that only exists, as far as I know and understand, in MS. And in that same way, there are pieces of experience that exist, I would say, exclusively in certain queer identities and certain locations, because your location and your culture really impact the way that your lived experience looks, right? But there are certain aspects of queer identity that are exclusively contained within one or maybe two specific identities. Like, for example, an attraction to exclusively men as a man is only something that exists in a gay man's experience, right? Because a bi man would also like, well, another gender. I was gonna say women, but let's be honest, it's just another gender. So, and like, if you're specifically stating it as being a man who exclusively and only likes men, that's a very specific experience compared to like liking someone of your own gender, which is a wider understanding of an experience. And if you're liking someone of your own gender without stating that exclusivity of it, so you're not exclusively and only liking someone of your own gender, you're liking someone of your own gender, end of sentence, possible extra sentences after, again, that is a comparable experience for a lot of different queer people. So, what I'm saying is that being vague isn't always a bad thing, but it's not always a good thing either. And annoyingly, there is a lot of nuance here, and it's very difficult to explain. Why did you make this video? Well, it's very difficult to explain because none of these things are simple, and I think maybe I didn't hold enough space for that earlier in this series of How to Write LGBT Characters, and why I should anyway. Because in the grand scheme of things, everybody's queer identity is a very personal experience, right? It is coloured in by the rainbow flag. No, well, yeah, it's coloured in by your lived experience, your relationship experience, your culture, your customs, your disability status, even. It's impacted by every other piece of your life in the same way that it in turn impacts every other piece of your life. Like, people talk about it as if queer people are weird for letting their identity, their queerness, impact everything. But when you think about it, the fact that I speak English as my primary language, that I was raised in an English-speaking household, that I live in an English-speaking country, that I am completely fluent in English, both spoken and written, that colours every aspect of my experience, right? I'm not sitting here with a thorough understanding, like the understanding I have of English, of any other language. I have base touristy kind of understanding of a couple of different languages. I know how some other languages beyond those ones function, but I couldn't have an in-depth conversation. I couldn't present this, for example, this video, or anything on this YouTube channel in another language. Any other language. I couldn't do that. I'm not fluent enough in any of them. So speaking English as my primary and, let's be honest, kind of only real experience of language, it colours my experience of the world around me. It colours my experience of communication. It colours my experience of understanding time. It colours my experience of how I look at art and adverts. There's a whole psychological initiative about where people look first in adverts, but it only exists the way that it does for not English-speaking countries, but countries where the writing goes from left to right. Because when your writing goes from left to right and you are practiced in reading it, your eye will naturally be drawn to the top left of any given piece of paper, page, whatever. Anything with text, your eye is going to go to the top left. For I'm gesturing at my top left and I'm thinking, that's not your top left. But your eye will go there first because you have been trained into it. It's not a natural instinct, it's a learned instinct. And that's why queerness colours every aspect of your experience, is that it is one of those base pieces that make you up. It's one of those things that does impact how you interact with the world. And that's true of any sexuality or gender identity. But the point is not that, actually, that's not the point. But the point is that is relevant to this whole conversation, because obviously if you have characters who have queer identities, whether you share them or not, you have a kind of a duty, I guess, to represent them to the best of your ability. And that means that you have to make the decision for yourself whether you are going to use terminology that is modern and appropriate for now, whether you are going to use terminology that was appropriate for a bygone era. And again, be careful with bygone era stuff because some of it is slurs. Or whether you are going to use some other form of language, whether you're going to come up with your own specific terms, or whether you are going to just describe the experience. Because the world we live in does impact the culture we are a part of, does impact how we interact with these things, how we explain ourselves, how we communicate who we are and how we live our lives and what our experience looks like. And when you're writing characters, that needs to be represented within the character. So I guess what I'm saying is using proper terms, modern terms, is often a good choice. I stand by that as a piece of advice. It's often, not always, the right choice. But when it is the wrong choice, it is our duties as authors to try and make our characters' experience and identity clear in whatever format and whatever way we can. It's not easy to do it without the terminology, but it's not impossible and it's not a bad idea. Funnily enough, I made notes about this and I have been looking at them. They're over here. I have been looking at them and I have not been able to maintain a clear path for my thoughts. I have spent the last week sick beyond sick. I'm very just struggling with unwellness. So if you've been able to hear that in my voice, I'm very sorry. But such is life, and sometimes we get sick. And I know what caused it. I'm fine. And anyway, so I hope that this made sense. I hope that it was clear. I hope you have an amazing Pride Month. It is a difficult one this year, and if you're looking for a book that will help you shout into the void about it, Welcome to Humanity might be the choice. I brought that out in 2023 in June, so obviously I'm hyping it up a bit, but I also have queer characters in all of my other books, and I am currently working on the sequel to Unlicensed Delivery. So if you are excited about reading the sequel to Unlicensed Delivery, I am trying to make that happen. I have nothing else I want to raise. I will, if you want to find me in all of my books, all the links to in the description box below, right next to the like and subscribe buttons if you feel like sticking around. I will be adding more to how to write LGBT characters and why you should anyway as time goes by and I come up with ideas. But if you have any requests or suggestions, feel free to let me know what they are. By suggestions, I mean suggestions for topics, not how to make my videos better. Not interested in that. This is what you get. And I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.